The family stepped into a cozy workshop. The shelves were lined with dozens of ceramic Labubu figurines. On one of them, a crack was visible along the side. From the crack, thin black roots slowly crawled out. All the figurines on the shelves simultaneously turned their heads toward the visitors. Their smiles stretched wide, their eyes becoming hollow. Damp clay patterns spread across the walls, forming into distorted little Labubu faces. The workshop owner stood behind the counter. Behind her, all the clay Labubu stared directly at the family. The display case trembled, and on the cracked figurine appeared a wide, unnatural grin. The family descended into the basement. The walls there were coated with hardened, glossy clay, and the door to the storage room was tightly shut. On the potter's wheel stood an unfinished statue. Its features blended the face of a monster with that of Labubu. From the kiln, a scorched clay hand burst out and seized the statue. The staircase was crowded with small Labubu figurines, their heads turning in unison toward the people. Sticky clay squelched under the family's feet, slowly pulling them deeper and deeper. In the kiln's window, shadows flickered with enormous grins, as though someone was watching from inside. The basement wall cracked open, revealing a passage into a cavern of solidified clay. The underground hall was entirely sculpted from ceramics. In the center rose a throne. Upon the throne sat the Queen of Labubu. On her head was a crown of sharp shards. Her empty sockets were filled with tiny clay copies of the family. The family sank waist-deep into the soft clay. Around them wandered small, twisted Labubu, creeping ever closer. The family had already turned into porcelain figurines. They stood frozen among the ceramic decorations of the underground kingdom, while the Queen of Labubu smiled with her eyeless face. Grandpa's letter. One day, our grandfather left and never came back. We searched for him, but it was no use. Half a year later, while going through his closet, I picked up Grandpa's coat and felt something in the pocket. I reached in, unfolded a note, and saw his handwriting. It said, "My dear ones, this is not a farewell, not a will. It's a joke. I've been living in the forest with an old friend you've never met. Here's the address. Once you find this letter, come visit. I want to see your faces." A week later, we drove to the coordinates. The forest was deep, the road broken, no signal. The house was real, wooden, old. Inside, it smelled like firewood. We waited an hour, then two. Night fell quickly. Something rustled outside. Dad went to check. He didn't come back. We were alone. George noticed. One of the cups was empty. Peppa turned around, but she wasn't looking at Mom anymore. She was staring at something behind her. The deleted episode of Peppa Pig. The porcelain doll. Peppa finds an old, dusty toy box in the attic. Inside is a large doll with a porcelain face, but it doesn't have a face, just a smooth white oval. "What a strange doll," says Peppa, looking at her. George looks at the doll with apprehension and hides behind his mother. At night, it seems to Peppa that the doll is looking at her. She hears quiet whispers from her room, even though no one is there. The next morning, the doll is in a different place. Peppa tries to get rid of the doll, but it always comes back. One day, while playing with George, Peppa draws the doll's face with a marker pen. At first, it's funny, but at night, the face on the doll changes. Now it's an evil grimace with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. Peppa is terrified. She realizes that the doll is alive and something bad is happening. She runs to Mama Piggy, but she doesn't believe her. At night, Peppa wakes up from the cold. She sees a doll by her bed. The doll stretches its porcelain hand towards her. Peppa screams, but no one comes. In the morning, Peppa disappears. George is playing alone in the garden, but he is no longer grunting with joy. He holds a faceless doll in his hands. Piggy's mom and dad are standing at the window, their faces full of despair. Their voices are barely audible. Where is our Peppa? Deleted Peppa Pig episode, The Living Toy. George loved his dinosaur, but that day, the toy fell into a place where it shouldn't have gone. George didn't know. Some toys find their owners on their own. When George disappeared, Peppa decided to look for him, but she had no idea. She would have to search not for her brother, but for what had taken him. The trail led to the nursery, where it all began. The door to the nursery swung open, and Peppa saw a giant dinosaur holding George in its claws.
Give him back!
Peppa shouted, but the dinosaur already knew his name. Peppa tried to rescue her brother, but the dinosaur swatted her away with its tail. George mumbled. His voice sounded strange, as if the dinosaur was learning how to be him. Peppa grabbed a toy hammer and struck the dinosaur's paw. It dropped George.
Run!
Peppa yelled, but George didn't move. His eyes turned red. In the morning, George returned, but Peppa saw that now the dinosaur was always watching him. At night, a voice was heard behind the door.
The little dinosaur. Mine.
He waiting, because children can be lost so easily, especially when they think they've been found. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, The Evil Force. An ordinary day, Peppa decided to draw, starting with a simple apple. But something went wrong, and the apple simply dissolved into reality. Peppa couldn't believe her eyes. Her desire to test her new power led to the next step. Each new drawing disappeared from her world. Soon, Peppa realized her power knew no bounds. She left home in the name of experimentation and set a new goal: the school. Every stroke of her marker became a new threat. The school began to vanish from reality. The facade flickered and dissolved away. Peppa looked at the empty field. She felt like a god in a world of ink, but someone was watching her, always watching. Peppa sensed that something was wrong and decided to return, but what she saw shocked her, freezing her with fear. The room seemed empty, but that was a lie. Sitting before her was her doppelganger, drawing something. With each stroke, he recreated her appearance, frightening and alien. Peppa froze in horror, realizing her power had gained its own will. The doppelganger looked at her with hollow eyes as she slowly dissolved into the space, unable to save herself. Peppa and George decided to take a walk in the forest and stumbled upon an old, abandoned house. It looked very gloomy. Broken windows, overgrown bushes, creaky door. Inside, it was dark and cold. Cracked portraits hung on the walls. Their eyes seemed alive. Suddenly, it became dark outside the window. At that moment, a strange woman appeared, the owner of the house. Her face was pale, and her eyes were cold and frightening. She smiled strangely and said,
Welcome. You shouldn't have come here.
Suddenly, she began to change, her face distorted. Her eyes shone with bright red light, and something black flowed out of them. Peppa tried to run, but the door slammed shut by itself. The demon owner grabbed Peppa and George with her long claws. Their screams disappeared into the darkness. Everything around started to distort. The house's owner dragged the children into her dark basement. Peppa and George were tied up. Their mouths were covered with rags. The owner was boiling something murky in a huge cauldron and muttered,
Soon I will enjoy this.
Peppa turned around and saw Susie and Rebecca. They were also tied up and trembling with fear. Suddenly, a familiar, sinister whisper sounded. The door opened. Standing in the doorway was Evie, with tentacles and a sinister smile. She grabbed the house owner with one of her tentacles and swallowed her with a sinister sound. Afterward, Evie smiled sweetly but continued to radiate horror. The children were scared. They already knew what awaited them. Evie wasn't full yet and was planning to fix that. Peppa, George, and little Evie snuggled comfortably in bed. A bedtime story, the perfect end to the day. Peppa's gaze drifted toward the bedroom door behind which something was awakening.
I'll check the kitchen. Quickly, go to sleep.
Said Mommy Pig, but she never returned.
Mom!
George and Evie looked anxiously into the semi-darkness of the corridor. The call of darkness came from there. Peppa took Evie's hand and they stepped forward into the unknown. Dark streams flowed down the walls. Each step could be their last.
Mom, where are you?
And the darkness answered. Suddenly, a splash. Ink began to rise upward. From the droplets, a silhouette appeared, almost reaching the ceiling. A thin body, tentacle-like arms covered with cracks. Two blazing red orbs for eyes. A mouth twisted into a crooked, predatory grin. Black liquid dripping from its fangs. It knows where you are and is waiting for its moment. The monster's tentacles suddenly swept at George and Evie. Peppa screamed in horror, reaching out for them, but her hands passed through the black mass. It doesn't eat, it transforms. George and Evie disappeared into the ink-like mass, and after a second, they reappeared, but already changed. Their eyes were completely black, their smiles unnaturally wide, their skin gray. Now they are his servants.
Play with us, Peppa.
Suddenly, from the depths of the corridor, Mommy and Daddy emerged, distorted, their faces smeared, eyes black, with traces of black liquid in the corners of their mouths. Even loved ones have become strangers, and now she is alone. Peppa and George spent the weekend at the country house. While their parents relaxed at home, they played in the garden.
George, let's go look for treasure.
They got carried away and dug too deep. Suddenly, they fell into some underground space. It resembled an underworld. Everything around exuded horror. Peppa and George walked along a dark corridor and emerged into a huge ritual hall. The room was lit by a red glow. Walls were draped with chains, bones and skeletons lay scattered around, and in the center stood a table.
George, look! This must be a sacrificial altar!
Peppa, I think we should leave.
George muttered nervously.
Yes, right now!
Peppa said as if she had an idea, but George was already pulling her by the hand toward the exit. Suddenly, they realized they couldn't escape on their own.
Are we stuck here forever?
Don't cry, we'll figure something out.
Peppa said, and started calling for help. Their cries brought their parents running. They were furious, but helped the piglets get out. On the way home, Peppa enthusiastically told them about the ritual hall. Her excitement frightened George. Their parents just exchanged glances and laughed. That night, Peppa said,
George, I have something special.
She pulled a small bone from under her pillow. It was glowing with a bright green light.
Peppa, you're going to get into trouble?
George warned anxiously, but Peppa didn't listen and happily played with her find. Suddenly, the floor in the nursery cracked open into two parts, and from it emerged a gigantic skeleton with red eyes, a terrible smile, black claws, and red tentacles behind its back.
You stole my bone. You will pay for this,
It said in a demonic voice. The skeleton grabbed Peppa's hand and lifted her toward the ceiling. Meanwhile, Dad and Mom Pig were sitting in the living room reading books. Suddenly, Evie ran into the room.
Bear! Where is my bear, Mommy?
Honey, he's probably lost again among your toys. Let's go find him.
Mommy Pig picked up Evie in her arms, and they headed to her room. When they opened the door, they froze in horror. Everything in the room was upside down. Walls were scratched with claws, and in the middle of the room hung Bear on a rope with black crosses instead of eyes.
My bear!
Sweetheart, it's just some evil joke.
Mom said nervously. Suddenly, they heard wild screams from Peppa's and George's nursery. The room was in chaos. George was hanging in a net in the upper corner of the room with white eyes as if hypnotized. Peppa was standing against the wall with black eyes and a creepy smile. She was whispering some spell and scratching something on the wall with a bone. Dad Pig was lying on the floor and barely managed to say, "Run!" In the center stood an ominous skeleton. It turned toward the door and whispered in that same chilling demonic voice,
Oh, we have guests. You're just in time. I just finished with these little pigs.
George was standing by an open, empty toy box, crying.
My dinosaur is gone.
When the main thing is lost, the scary awakens. Peppa entered the room, hugged her brother, and looked around. Peppa's gaze was drawn to something on George's bed, an old plush teddy bear covered in black liquid. She found not what she was looking for. The buttons on the bear were slightly trembling and turning toward Peppa. Black liquid slowly seeped from a seam under its ear. Suddenly, the bear threw out a paw tentacle and grabbed Peppa's hand. Peppa screamed and threw the bear away. It twitched on the floor, then ran off into the corridor. Peppa grabbed George's hand and ran after him. The chase had begun. Peppa and George wandered in the semi-darkness. On the walls, black paw prints. At the dark end of the corridor, a silhouette of a bear flickered. It disappeared behind the attic door. Where light did not reach, dwelled the keeper. Peppa took a flashlight from the wall. They slowly climbed up the creaky stairs. Along the edges, webs of black tentacles like veins of living darkness. The center of the hall was covered in cobwebs. In it sat the bear keeper, grown to Peppa's size. Around, old toys, dolls with empty eye sockets, cars with red headlights frozen in anticipation. All forgotten toys began to move slowly. Their heads and headlights turned toward Peppa and George. The bear keeper hissed in a low voice,
Lost toys. Your fault.
His mouth with needle-sharp teeth opened wide, black liquid pouring out. Tentacles from the bear lunged at Peppa. She dodged, throwing aside the box, and out rolled Dinosaur. George shouted and ran to him. Peppa turned on her flashlight at full brightness. Its beam blinded the keeper. He squealed. His tentacles recoiled. He ran into a crack in the floor. Peppa and George descended the stairs. They ran into their bedroom and slammed the door shut. It was quiet in the room. On Peppa's bed stood the bear keeper, but he was motionless. Next to him lay George's dinosaur with a grin of needle-sharp teeth. They will come for you if you forget about them again. A typical evening, tea, girlfriends. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The light bulbs suddenly began to flicker. The girls fell silent and looked up. The first alarm. The house had awakened. Susie began to tremble. The hum grew louder. The shadows became restless. The shadow beneath Susie's chair pulsed and darkened. Susie screamed, dropping her doll. Peppa grabbed Susie's hand. The shadow reached for Susie's leg. The kitchen turned into a trap. The girls ran into the living room. The room was quiet. The silence was deceptive. The couch's shadow melted onto the floor, turning into a flat black puddle. It slowly spread across the floor. From its center rose something, like a shapeless ink-blot tentacle. Susie stared in horror. Peppa recoiled. The puddle slid toward them, stretching. Peppa shoved Susie toward the hallway door, but escape was a lie. Darkness awaited them there too. A mass of wallpaper was already partly oozing down under the stairs. An eye on a tentacle stared at them. The Shadow Eater had seeped out of the living room. Peppa and Susie ran toward the staircase. The eater tried to cut them off, sliding along the wall. Susie nearly fell. The pounding of footsteps, heavy breathing, the rising sounds of monsters. Peppa pulled Susie into the nursery and slammed the door. Black liquid seeped from underneath. A message appeared on the wall. "We are in the walls." George was there too. Black film covered his mouth. His black eyes shot open. The darkness had already consumed him. George's shadow tore away from the wall, forming a new eater. Susie screamed in terror. Peppa spotted a flashlight on the dresser. Bright light! In the flashlight beam, the Shadow Eater recoiled, writhing as it slithered under the door. The wallpaper, a giant mass with eyes, was stuck to the outside window. The flashlight flickered wildly and died. A wet, slurping sound echoed in the dark. Suddenly, Peppa's face with black eyes. "Your house has consumed the light.